Welcome to Chapter 3 of HIPAA Security Rule. In this chapter, you will learn about the HIPAA Security Rule's physical safeguards. The physical safeguards involve implementing physical measures, policies, and procedures to protect a covered entity's electronic information systems, related buildings, and equipment from natural and environmental hazards and unauthorized intrusions. There are 4 standards under the physical safeguards: facility access controls, workstation use, workstation security, and device and media controls. Some examples of physical safeguards would be alarm systems, surveillance cameras, restricting areas where EPHI is stored, ID badges and visitor badges, on-site security guards, computer servers in locked rooms, locking the cabinets where records of PHI are stored. Facility access controls. The Facility Access Control Standard requires organizations to implement policies and procedures to limit physical access to its electronic information systems and the facility or facilities in which they are housed, while ensuring that properly authorized access is allowed. There are 4 implementation specifications under this standard: contingency operations, facility security plan, access control and validation procedures, as well as maintenance records. Contingency operations are the policies and procedures to assign an individual to have access to certain facilities in support of restoration of lost data in the event of an emergency. Facility security plan is implementing policies and procedures to safeguard the facility and the equipment therein from unauthorized physical access, tampering, and theft. Access control and validation procedures include implementing procedures to control and validate a person's access to facilities based on their role or function, including visitor control and control of access to software programs for testing and revision. Maintenance records are implementing policies and procedures to document repairs and modifications to the physical components of a facility which are related to security. For example, hardware, walls, doors, or even locks. It is to be noted that even if an organization is a part of a larger organization or shares a building with an organization, the other organization is responsible for the physical security of EPHI. Let's do a case study on facility access controls. Emily works for a large medical device making firm and is trying to implement facility access controls. She is worried about access control and validation procedures for visitors. The firm has a policy in place that requires all visitors to sign in, wear a visitor's badge, and be escorted with an employee at all times. Emily is curious about whether this is enough to satisfy HIPAA Security Rule's Facility Access Control standard for visitors. The answer would be organizations can utilize security measures such as visitor badges, visitor log, or visitors being escorted by an employee to satisfy the standard. For a more modern approach, they could also use a biometric visitor identity management system. Workstation use. The Workstation use standard requires organizations to implement policies and procedures to ensure that workstations and other computer systems that may be used to send, receive, store, or access EPHI are only used in a secure and legitimate manner. The policies and procedures must specify the proper functions to be performed, the manner in which those functions are to be performed, and the physical attributes of the surroundings of a specific workstation or class of workstation that can access EPHI. An example would be to log off desktop computing device before leaving a workstation unattended and regularly updating antivirus software. For portable devices that can be carried out of the organization's premises, there could be policies to limit what can be stored. It is to be noted that a workstation is defined in the rule as an electronic computing device, for example, a laptop, a desktop computer, or any other device that performs similar functions, and electronic media stored in its immediate environment. Let's do a case study on workstation use. Liam is a consultant for a large healthcare consulting firm that has several branches across the United States. Liam has to travel frequently to meet with his team members because they are spread out across the US. Liam uses a smartphone that contains EPHI maintained by the firm. Liam called the firm's security officer Noah to ask him how the HIPAA security rule might affect his use of his smartphone. How should Noah reply? Portable devices such as laptops, tablets, computers, smartphones, etc. are included in the workstation use standard. Thus, the firm will have to establish policies and procedures to use some kind of security control for smartphones that contain PHI to safeguard the privacy and security of the information. Workstation security. The Workstation Security Standard requires organizations to implement physical safeguards for all workstations that access ePHI to restrict access to authorized users. Examples to comply with these standards could be positioning the desktop monitors or laptops in a way that limits the view of passersby, put password-protected screensavers, or restricting access to buildings, workstations, offices, faxes, printers, and remote devices. Let's do a case study on workstation security. XYZ Healthcare appointed Juliet as the new security officer. Juliet has noticed that Alex, who has access to ePHI from his workstation, often leaves his workstation unattended. In the past, Juliet walked past his workstation and noticed that ePHI is visible on the workstation screen. She is worried that a security breach could occur because many other people have access to his work area. What can Juliet do to protect the ePHI on Alex's workstation when he leaves it unattended? Juliet should implement a policy and procedure for workstation security that requires employees to use password-protected screensaver that can be invoked by both the individual as well as when the workstation is left unattended for a predetermined amount of time. Device and media controls. The Device and Media Control Standard requires organizations to implement policies and procedures for transfer, disposal, removal, and reuse of electronic media. Disposal is establishing policies and procedures to address the final disposition of ePHI and the hardware or electronic media on which it is stored. Media reuse. Establishing procedures for removal of ePHI from electronic media before the media are made available for use. Accountability are the procedures to maintain a record of the movements of any person responsible therefor. Data backup and storage. This is creating a retrievable exact copy of ePHI when needed before movement of equipment. Let's do a case study on device and media controls. A small clinic in Atlanta sold some of their workstations only to discover that claim histories of its staff were never erased from the hard drives. What should the clinic have done differently? The clinic should have had a policy and procedure in place to do a low-level security erase of each workstation's hard drive before taking it out of service and reassigning it. As an alternative, the clinic could also have physically destroyed or shredded the hard drives. Required versus addressable. Unlike the required specifications, rules that are itemized as addressable are slightly different and offer more flexibility. These are not, however, optional. The covered entities and business associates must fully understand this. While often being technical, addressable specifications allow organizations the flexibility to use discretion and implement various security measures to accomplish the objectives of the requirements. As an example, if you were given an addressable specification to surprise and present someone with a birthday cake, you can either make it yourself or buy one from a store. It doesn't matter as long as the person receives the gift. Each organization must assess whether an addressable implementation specification is appropriate or reasonable for their practice. It is to be noted that for each addressable specification not implemented, organizations must describe and fully document why they chose to either not implement them or use a different method or implement a partial solution. You've reached the end of Chapter 3. Congratulations! In the upcoming chapters, you will be learning the technical safeguards and becoming HIPAA security compliant.